basically, in the two previous sessions, we have been theorizing about moral markets and secondly on different shapes of data governance and so on. But in this session, which is the last of this afternoon, we are going to get into practice. And basically here I will introduce you my colleagues here, but basically what we are going to do now is to go to this commons-based approach under the practitioner perspective and experience. So here on my left, I have the pleasure to introduce you to Ramon Roca, who is the president and co-founder of the Gifinet Foundation, which, as far as we know, it's a grassroots project with the objective to offer an open and free telecom infrastructure. We will learn more about this in a minute. And at the other side of Ramon, we have Marco Berlinguer, who has a PhD in public policy and social transformation. And he is also currently teaching at the IGOP from the Autonomous University of Barcelona and the SCAC University. So welcome to this session. I have to say that we have a kind of a challenge because we have 40 minutes, two brilliant speakers, and I'm sure that many questions will be arisen. So I'm not going to say anything else, and I just pass the floor to Marco Berlinguer, who is going to share with us his perspective about how have we moved from a social movement to a new mode of production, and you will illustrate us about the open source movement. So thank you, Marco. The floor is yours.
What I have to do now?
Wrong.
The green one, yes.
No, but this is my presentation.
No.
This is your presentation. So sorry, maybe we can ask to switch the presentation to Marco's presentation. Yes, now it's coming.
Okay.
So now we don't have the challenge of the hybrid, panel, but we have the challenge of the wrong slide. So everything's ready now.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to talk about the open source software, which is a very interesting experience, in my opinion, and which allows us to reflect about the role that social movements can have in innovation, and also is the pioneer in a way. The free and open source software has been the pioneer in the rediscovery of the commons on the frontiers of the digital revolution. So the free and open source software is, I would say, the most mature manifestation, a concretization of what Elinor Ostrom called the new commons at the end of her life, which are quite different from the traditional commons that she studied. And also, I would say, it's important to reflect about the fact that the software is the core technology and the core industry of the digital revolution. So we are talking about something that is at the core of the general transformation of our society, no? And to see the evolution of this phenomenon in this industry is quite interesting. Moreover, we can say that the inventions, the innovations that the free and open source software introduced at different levels have been emulated in many other domains. So this is another, if you like, manifestation, proof of the significance of this experience and of this trajectory, because it has spread in contents, networks, we will say, hardware and data. I would say that in this moment, what's happening in hardware and data is extremely important in terms of adoption of models that mutatis mutandis can be considered as an expansion of these innovations. So the free and open source software was born as a social movement in all its characteristics, and was born at the margins of the industry, at the margins of the institutional life, and progressively it grew interstitially, and it's now, we can say, without doubt, at the center of this fundamental technology and this fundamental industry, which is software. And in each step that the open source software lived through, it has been a source of innovation. So this is also interesting to remark. The beginning go back to the 80s and especially in the 90s. And the first concretizations of this experience were informal communities, which invented and laid down the basic innovations that still characterize the forms of producing software, which then, as we will see, has spread and has penetrated in all the software industry. Still, we have the communities, which were not the original source of these innovations, are still very, very important in the software and in the open source ecosystem. Apache Foundation is a good example of a big foundation that still maintains the spirit of the original communities. But nevertheless, what happened, I would say, since the middle of the 2000s, the first decade of 2000s, is that the last decade has been marked more than by the communities, by the adoption of this model of production and innovation by the industry. So it's quite surprising, if we like, because, for example, one of the characteristics that is intrinsic to the fact that this is a commons is that it cannot be commercialized directly. A software which is based on the license that are typical of the free and open source software. So it was surprising to see how it spread progressively. But if you look now, for example, I give you some example of the situation we observe now in this ecosystem. If you look at the membership of the Linux Foundation, which is the most important institution, if you like, that was born within this trajectory, you find all the tech industry of the world as part of the foundation. But also it's extremely significant the complete turn that Microsoft was obliged to do in relationship with the open source because of this progressive expansion and dominance that the open source gained on all the frontiers of the digital innovations. Especially the cloud computing was very important in this understanding of Microsoft that it had to change completely its policies. No? Microsoft has been the arch-enemy of the open source and the free software for long. And there are various models that we can observe about how companies and new forms of generating market and of capitalistic competition have been able, in a way, to absorb these challenging characteristics that have the open source. No? This is the original form, which is about selling services on the top of the open source. This is even more interesting, which is the progressive capacity that the companies learn about cooperating in building together. There are, for example, in this case, hundreds, even thousands of companies which collaborate in creating what we can call common infrastructures. And this is another model that was introduced in a way by Google's with Android, now, which is a strategy through the introduction of an open source solution, an open source platform, of a strategy for reorganizing an entire sector of production and an entire ecosystem. No? So it's about competitive strategies that now are routinely used in many areas. For example, here you have several cases, examples in the artificial intelligence. So also in this second stage, which is about now the absorption of this model into the market, we can observe many important innovations that were driven by this phenomenon. Probably the most important are about these new forms of capitalism that have emerged, and in general, the existence of models which are hybrids, where we see, in a way, managed in different configurations, the idiosyncrasy that exists between a commons and a market, but also the potential synergies that can exist between these two different models of organizing the property, the governance, and the generation of value. So, to arrive to today, my understanding, but I think is corroborated by evidence, many evidences, is that in the next stage we are still, in a way, in a process of evolution of this phenomenon. For this reason, I was saying in the making, in the title, because we have to consider these phenomena as still evolving, and the next stage, in my opinion, is going to be characterized by the entrance in force of the public actor in this ecosystem. There are many signs, of course, not just in the open source, of this politicization of the next stage of the digital transformation, but when you enter at this stage in the digital policy, you meet naturally open source, and this is what's happening. There are various reasons behind this increased importance of the public intervention, which is not limited to the digital sphere. But also I would say that it's not new, and as it has been in the past, the open source is going to necessarily to provoke and to push for innovations in the public policy. And these innovations are absolutely necessary because, as I was saying, it's not new, the attempt by public actors, public policies at different levels of endorsing, supporting, and trying to take advantage of the potentiality of the open source. But we don't have any good model up to now about this policy. So innovations are extremely necessary for this new stage, and we will see probably emerging a new generation of public policy around the attempt to exploit the potential of open source and around the attempt to intervene in a new way of the public actors in the digital policy. These are three areas which I've been studying the public policy applied to the open source for a couple of years between 2018 and 2019. And these were now, for me, emerging areas for innovative public policies, which then, afterward, the publication of this essay, have been concretized, especially at the European level union. Here you have a collection of initiatives which took place in the European context in the last 1 year and a half, more or less. You have a declaration of the Council of the European Union. You have Gaia X, which is one of the most interesting initiatives, which has been generated initially by the Ministry of Economy of Germany, and many others, which go exactly in the direction that I'm talking about. But also, another very interesting evolution is happening, for example, in China. China is adopting a very ambitious policy of adoption of open source at the maximum level of government. And so we are going to see in the next stage the open source becoming a central element of the ongoing competition that is taking place for the hegemony in the technological, economical, and geopolitical future of our societies. And these are probably three elements which are going to characterize this third stage from three capabilities, three fundamental capabilities that are going to decide about who is going to win, in a way, the struggle for the hegemony of this new stage of development of this process, which is about creating coalitions of state, communities, and productive ecosystems, capacity of leadership in collaborative production and innovation, and a capacity of orchestration of multi-level and mixed in terms of combining markets, state, and commons mechanisms in the forms of governance and in the forms of wealth generation.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you for being so strict with the timing. And I think that you have put on the table some sources of hope that David was before asking. And now we're moving from software to hardware, because Ramon comes from Gifinet, as I said before, and his experience is more on the infrastructure level and how to provide this common infrastructure, and his speech is about internet access through shared infrastructures as in commons. So Ramon, the floor is yours.
Thanks for inviting me. It was a pleasure to be here, to hear Marco before, in particular when talking, and also about data and the other workshops, our sessions. And quite often I feel very jealous when hearing people about open data, open source, and so on, because when we are switching to infrastructure, I mean, we are very much the hippie that Balmer was mentioning about Microsoft, at the time that they were very against I mean, we're going like in the other way that the things are going. It's quite often very difficult for us to explain how to apply, and hopefully that's what I'm going to try, my humble contribution to the audience. I'm an activist. I'm not from the academia. Sorry for that, but what's happening in the real world, we're trying to apply the commons and why we do, and how it's needed to succeed, which is not easy, in particular when you are very much against the mainstream practices that are happening, and everybody is saying that we are the hippies. How was the hippie GPLs, which is contaminating everything. And at the end of the day, and that's the only theory image that I'm using, I know very much of all of you already saw this iconography about the evolution. I know in the very last stage, these two stages, actually, it happened only with 15, 20 years of difference. So it's going very fast. And we're evolution, and we got into computers and now into this kind of, flat screens that we have everyone in our pockets. And it went very deeply in our lives. And actually, this is the 21st century. I mean, and realize or not, the problem is that, and that's just a general thought, that's why it's important. It's already said that United Nations declared internet access as a human right? If you don't have internet access, then you don't have access to education or to many other rights, or even healthcare or whatever. The pandemic was very clear in that. I mean, the connected and unconnected can make a very big difference. So we have to be concerned on how important it is to really connect everyone, because there is still many people not connected. So, and I'm hearing quite often we have 80% of the people with broadband access and so on, and we're talking about human rights. Will be unacceptable that having only 80% people having education, and what about the other 20? And what about the other 25 in the 80% of the territory? So is that dramatic? Let's say, and the pandemic really showed that again, because if 80% of the territory doesn't have the same opportunities than the other 20, right? And it's not acceptable. We have to look in the other way. If we have 15% or just 5% of people without internet, then it is required to connect everyone, because we cannot accept 5% people not having access to public health or to education. It will have to be 100% with the same opportunities. If we don't reach that, then we are in a big trouble, because we are creating discrimination. And when you're looking to the picture and to the problem and try to connect everyone or everything from the mountains, that is what I'm trying to explain in that diagram in the top. We put the top. The top is connecting the people. The rest is in the bottom, right? That's why we inverted the iconography, and it has to reach the mountain zones from the suburbs, from the industry. So it's about connecting everyone, and that's typically in the telecoms they say this is the last mile, right? It's well known, the last mile, and is the only thing that we are missing. Provide the last mile to everywhere with the same. There are many technologies, but the same options and everything. That's it. The other is already there. I mean, not far from any point across all the planet. We have fiber optics on the high power lines, in the railways, in the roads, in the submarine cables. Doesn't matter if you are talking about global south or global north. Satellites, of course, are everywhere also. And so that and interconnection as well is happening everywhere. So the only thing that we have to do is doing the last mile, which is very much the costly thing. And the problem of, and that's my case, this is my house. And in the winter, not in this, it is in the mountains, not in the mountains, in the Pre-Pyrenees, not far from here, about 1 hour and something driving, so it's not a big distance. And what happens is that I'm not living in, of course, I'm living in a municipality. There's an administrative district there, but there is no streets. I'm living in a rural area, but in a farm without the streets, without nothing else. And you know that we're said, if you go, for instance, 18 years ago was very much, we started doing radio links for getting connected at those places. Because at that time we were hearing, you know, the government spending lots of millions of euros for giving subsidies to companies to provide access to rural areas. But we were still unconnected at that time. Although that money was already spent, right? And so we have to find lives for getting connected. And so we started doing radio links. And in 2009, it is 12 years from now, we did the same with fiber optics. So now, and we did because, I mean, they were saying in those programs, and still, in many cases, and still Europe is feeding and inundating with billions of euros to the big companies for dealing with that, right? And fighting the digital divide. And reality is that, okay, for living in a place like there, you need, in the 20th century, you need electricity and water to take a shower or whatever. And in the 21st century, you need also internet for accessing to the rest of that's the only difference. So you have to need everything. And also, I moved from, in terms of electricity for the carbon print and so on, trying to move to carbon zero. So I know how much it costs to connect. And it costs 20 times more expensive to have drinkable water or something to get showered. If you don't get connected to the line, then you have to build your own hole in the floor and then sanitize the water and everything. And if you want to install solar panels and so on, and it is profitable, it takes 8 to 10 years, and then you get a return. And fiber, with fiber, which is the best, which, by the way, was said that it is not profitable to connect those areas, and we very much trusted that version from the market and the sector. It's not profitable, and so it was 10 to 20 times cheaper to get connected with fiber optics in a place like this, because fiber is much cheaper than copper, right? That's the reality. So, thinking on to make it, it is, in a common sense, it is possible, but we have to do in a way that it's not connecting myself. If I'm using, and it's not because of vision or political principles or whatever. It's about practical sense. If I have to go from the city to install an antenna and trying to connect there, I have to trespass. There is something in between that I need to cooperate. So it has to be done in a community approach, right? And if I am throwing a cable and coming from the city to reach my home, it will be ridiculous to do it just by myself. I mean, I will connect everything in between, because it has then is when the cost goes down, and it costs just 10 times cheaper than, because the same cable can connect everyone and provide electricity. So it's for nothing else but common sense. Then we do that in a commons for practical sense, and it works. And when we have done, you realize that on the beginning was said that was not profitable for the companies. Okay, so what's not profitable for an agriculture means that when you are harvesting the fields, it means that you don't get paid for paying the gas of the tractor. That's when you are going in losses. But then, I mean, if we do, and we are even saving, comparing in what I was paying, so I saved money just for getting connected with fiber and keeping that fiber in commons. And we keep that fiber in commons because if we leave that fiber to the municipality, for instance, because we want to make it public, right? 10 years ago, you remember, very likely they are going to privatize the fiber and sell it to a private company. So we had to make some kind of form to ensure that that fiber will be as a public and a commons good, right? And that's it. So we did for common sense, practical, and it worked. And the total cost of ownership demonstrates that it's very much the best option for doing that, not for nothing else. And that's it. But the reality in the sector is very much different, and that's when the problem starts. Is that in telecoms, if you think twice, I mean. We can be the hippies, but I think at least we have common sense. But really what is not common sense is what happened here in the cities or not only in Barcelona. If you go to even the small, medium villages across Catalonia, you will see there are several fiber optics in those urban areas and not maybe in other places in the MTET Spain. So one people have several infrastructures on place and others don't have nothing. And that's the reality. And why it happened? Because only a single infrastructure, well managed, can support hundreds of internet service providers. But there is a problem. They are running in a way that the taxi drivers, which is the service provider, who are providing a service over a road for communicating. So I mean, the internet service providers are the same who are the owners and are managing the infrastructures. It's like having a taxi driver building the roads and then making the code for circulating to the roads. What's going to happen? That maybe that particular taxi driver will make a rule that is saying I'm having priority compared to any other taxi driver. So it's a conflict of interest in economics, but it's the way that it works and have been. So it's a mess, right? I mean, how the hell? I mean, if the taxi driver has the power to control the road, maybe will be no public transportation. That is very likely a result because of or no other companies will, and you won't be able to use your own car for using the same road. At least they will give preference to himself. It's very. I mean, it's common. You don't have. I mean, in a business school. I'm not trying to that. Being as a simple citizen, that's the best. Who was designing it in that way? We have to. So yeah, it's actually what we do: make the infrastructure as in commons, a maintainer, something, and creating an ecosystem. Just applying common sense without going in further discussions. The problem is that when you build something in commons and you have many companies and because that enables local economy, circular everybody. What is needed to manage a fiber? An electrician who installs a cable and then maintains a cable, and then someone else by the way, it doesn't have to be the same electrician providing the service and accessing Netflix and internet, and that's it. It's not that magic. The problem is that when that infrastructure starts growing and so on, and we are connecting actually like 200,000 people in the rural, which is very teeny compared to the cities, but very significant compared in those not populated areas, because the population is very spread, right? And so it's quite, many people still don't know, because they just went to their local shop and they get connected, and maybe they are using the infrastructure as in commons. And what we see is that, okay, as long as it starts growing, it creates an economic interest, of course, and starts the conflict. That's a tragedy of the commons that have to be solved. And I saw Marco also mentioning Ostrom, and very much to me was for an inspiration also, because she was designing the principles for running a commons, and that's to finish that is about creating a governance. I heard that word very much. For me, it was a discovery. I mean, maybe because of being in a business school, that's very obvious. And governance is about accounting. This is like this about and rules. And being sure that they apply it, and having an authority that doesn't work in self-regulation, let's say. It's not like free markets and doing everything, because if everything is free in terms of is in beer, then we are going to have a trouble. So yes or yes, for the survival of the commons, we need accounting to be sure that it is good practices apply it and avoid crazy things. If the market, you allow the market to be the taxi driver and as well the roading, making the roads, for sure, yes or yes, you will run into very likely problems. It's about doing participative tools and so that. And just to finish, and that makes me, and that's another, and because being in a business school, that was in 2019, and that was very surprising, because quite often you see people hearing about the duality or the dichotomy between the private market, liberalization, no interventions, that's like, we will solve everything. If opposite to the nationalization, state-owned, and so on. And I feel very stupid during that dichotomy, because where I am then, because it's neither one solution. And it was funny to see just 2 years ago, the economies recognizing that there are alternatives to this duality. And actually, it sounds stupid, because actually what we are applying is the business models that maybe were already invented centuries ago. When going to rural areas, it's very used to have goods as in commons. Typically, natural resources is what Elinor Ostrom was discussing. So why not? It can be translated to telecoms. And honestly, I want just to say, I mean, we are trying to use the common sense. And then by using the common sense, very likely economy as in commons will have in place, because it clearly can solve things that cannot be solved by just the free markets and let's say the traditional practices that are happening right now in telecoms. And that's it. Sorry for being a bit longer, and thanks.
For sharing your experience. I think that we have time now for the open mic. I don't know if in the floor there's, I mean, here in the room, there's someone that has raised a question. No. And the chat is not, yeah, sorry. Then Joan, we hear your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for the presentations. I have a question more direct to Ramon, even though, I mean, both can intervene. The one which is very pragmatic is, at what point did you start adopting the commons framework? Because you said that you started with common sense, but at some point you discover Ostrom framework, and it seems that you started applying. So my question is not about the time, but why did you decide to adopt it? And the second question regards a connection between the two presentations. In the first presentation, it seems that open source, to some extent, starts interpenetrating or becoming the infrastructure for other type of softwares, private softwares to be developed, which makes reality much more complex, and it opens the spaces for new evolutionary trajectories. And my question is, if I apply this idea to the context of GIFINet, it seems GIFINet started in rural areas. We know that it has gone to major cities, but still is not interpenetrating with the other models. So it's like, so where are the limits of a model like GIFINet, to the point that, let's assume, I know that there's a lot of spaces to grow, no? But beyond the rural areas, how can a model like the one that you are proposing coexist with the other models, no? Maybe it's a very broad question, but...
When I discovered, I'm not an economist. I come from the technology arena, and it was very naive. I think we did that in Commons, not because of reading Elinor Ostrom and knowing his, because it was natural. It was a natural choice. Let's do it together and so on. Then we realized that was the right way. But at some point we started to face problems. The theory was very nice, and then we realized that things have to be managed, governance have to be in place, and so on. And I remember being in a business school, but in Berkeley. I was sharing with the other audience and like this, I'm having these troubles, these guys are trying to steal from us, and this is a very well-known story. And yeah, the answer was that, yeah, that's why we are hearing you, because we want to understand how did you scale to solve those problems, because that will happen everywhere and and we were, let's say, and then somebody told me, have you read Elinor Ostrom? And then I realized that, then, yeah, that's very inspiring. You can agree with her on some places and some not, but of course she's very inspiring and a very, deserved Nobel Prize. And regarding to the second question, which was, sorry. To
what extent can a model like the one from...
yeah, what is the limit? I think common sense has no limit. Actually, for my opinion is how long it's going to take that speculative scenario that is right now happening. People deploying several, that's overbuilding. It has no sense. What about the carbon print for having 5, 10 infrastructures? That's stupidity. Will be at the end of the day more expensive for everyone in terms of technologically and efficiency and everything. And also economics. It doesn't make sense. Lots of things that are happening right now. Right now at my home, there is only not one fiber that I deployed in 2009. Also another one deployed by Telefonica in 2014, paid by the European Commission through the public grants and so on. So there is lots of stupid things happening still. And how long that's going to take? Has no limits. The thing is that we have to develop the good practices and so on. And in the long term, I think that we will be the winners, like in the open source right now. And Balmer, we have to eat his own words, saying, what is that contaminate everything? What contaminating everything is this kind of practices. So the question is how long it's going to take, and the speculation for sure will at some time, because why? Right now the companies are acquiring each other's is so volatile in the market. But if there are 4 cables, 5 cables in Barcelona, we're having, and not to say, because the more funny thing is that also the municipality has another cables by having, and a single cable can do everything. So the other are plastic that will be useless. And at some point, if we will look to the carbon print, we have actually to disconnect the cables, because I'm just making the facades more dirty. It's a stupidity. And so things have to be reverted, and the thing is, no limits. The limit is, of course, that we have to have in place the governance to ensure that we can grow up in let's say, in a sane scenario and solve the speculation, all the problems that yes or yes, because many people, liberals, are defending free markets and no regulations and so on. And the first thing that they are trying to do is to kill competition and become a monopoly. Is a common. I mean, free market was about having multiple alternatives, not kill the others. And that's why some regulations have to be in place and so on. But hopefully in the long term, not will be the winner. And the question is how long it's going to take to get back into the common sense.
Marco, would you like to add something?
Yes, I would comment in this way. First, also the free software emerged not as a commons. They didn't think, they didn't know the commons. They emerged pragmatically. They went, Stallman wanted to defend what he called the fundamental freedom of the user. So it was completely different, the trajectory. They ended up building the first digital common, the first inventing a new form of property in order to defend these freedoms. They ended up reinventing the commons in the digital era. So that's interesting to see that it was a pragmatic process that brought to the commons. And also I would share what Ramon was saying, that is, in a way, I think we suffer of lack of pragmatism in our approaches to policy. And one of the most important scholars of the digital commons, who is Yochai Benkler, for example, ended up, he theorized different things, probably he changed also his mind, but ended up not saying that the most important contribution that the commons gives today to our political thought is about enlarging our institutional and policy imaginary. This is what we need, and what is, in a way, blocked by this, as Ramon would say, this kind of hegemonic fixation that, in a way, is blocking the capacity, especially of the Western countries, to think in a pragmatic way about different possible solutions. And this is also a reason that I think China, in a way, is going to be advantaged because they are pragmatic. They apply different solutions according to which is the most effective. And this freedom of choosing different solutions, I think, is an advantage that we still don't have learned to apply, and it's time now that we learn to do it, because we have evidences that there are more wars that we thought were possible.
So we are now out of time. So questions, I invite you to approach the speakers after the closing, because now we have to move to the takeaways. And I think that it will take a couple of minutes so we can change the stage and so on. But first, let's give an applause to our speakers tonight. Thank you so much. And in the third panel, we got practical and pragmatic. We started the sessions, so the afternoon, talking about moral markets and social movements, and then about digitization and data. And in the end, we have been talking about software and hardware. And in the panel, we counted with Marco Berlinguer, who offered an overview about the free open software movement. He has depicted 3 different stages, but I just mention the third one, which is the hopeful one, that it will come according to his terms in this decade, in the 20s, and it's about the advance of free open software and public policy innovation. And he has connected this with mixed forms of governance, which include also public cooperation, for instance. And then he has also mentioned the need to orchestrate multi-level forms of cooperation in this sense. And he has also mentioned the Chinese case, and this has like this has been like an interesting example that you have brought, because it's another way to disrupt the market. So to some extent, using open software to break the rules of the winner takes it all economy that it's conquering the world at the moment. And from this software perspective, we have moved to the hardware by an activist, which is Ramon Roca, and he has shared his experience with Gifinet and their experience on providing infrastructure to rural areas under the concept that internet connection is it's a human right. And he has even asked if it's acceptable that only 80% of the people is connected, and what happens with the rest, with the other 20%. And their experience from the pragmatic approach that he has been sharing, it's all about self-regulation, accounting, and participatory governance. And also he has invited us to think about the commons as an alternative to the paradox or the false dichotomy between nationalization and privatization. So I would say that both have been practical and pragmatic in their approaches, and that the common point between the two interventions is the need to develop multi-level governance tools, processes, and actions.